Teachers, what is the most thing you've done in your classroom? Story 1. I was a marching band instructor just in the summer for band camp. One of the kids was eating a bag of Skittles during a break and she asked me, "Do you want to taste my rainbow?" Without thinking, I blurted out, "Not until you're 18, I wasn't fired." Story 2. I was teaching 5, 7 to 8-year-olds beginning woodworking at a private school. We were painting our projects. We were in a room alone, and I was a 35-year-old male, a young girl who was wearing denim shorts and a skirt that got paint all over her skirt. I caught myself with my hand under her skirt trying to wash the paint off with a wet cloth and thought, what would anyone think if they walked in on this scene? I let her clean off the paint as best as she could and finished the class. It scared the hell out of me. Story 3. Working as a classroom teacher's assistant in a primary school, the teacher was talking about recycling and composting. She drew an apple core on the whiteboard, only it looked exactly like a vagina. In a fit of giggles, I had to leave the room to compose myself. Story 4. Not me, but my 10th grade biology teacher was answering a question from a student who asked, "Can another animal impregnate a human?" He replied, "I'm sure we've all been in that situation. Click one wrong link on the internet and whoa, what is she doing with that horse?" But no, that is not possible. Story 5. This isn't NSFW, but in retrospect it was careless and could have gotten me in lots of trouble. My neighbor had a mannequin that was the same height as me. I had a pinhead mask. Halloween was a little over a week away. I couldn't resist. Day 1. Students enter the class and see Pinhead sitting behind my desk. They know it's me and they're right. It is me, but for 5 minutes into the period, I refuse to move or talk. After 5 minutes to take off the mask and start teaching and never talk about the mask. Day 2. Students enter and see Pinhead again sitting at my desk. The bell rings and class begins. After a minute, I walk into the room and start teaching. Students get nervous and start looking at Pinhead, who's sitting at my desk. They ask me about it. I refuse to acknowledge it. Focus on class. I yell at them. Day 3. Pinhead is still sitting at my desk, and I'm at the front of my class. As I predicted, students are now more courageous. They approach the mannequin and try to touch it. I preemptive by admitting that, yes, it's just a mannequin and not going to shout so they can hear the hollow plastic underneath. Even so, throughout class I see them stealing worried glances at the mannequin. Day 4. Pinhead is still there at the desk. I tell the students, "Sorry, I just haven't taken a moment." Since it's weird to leave the school with a life-size mannequin, we laugh. Day 5. Pinhead is still there. I tell my students that I'm actually quite enjoying his company. I made him a prop in my Spanish class, using him to model dialogue. "Oh teacher, you're so quirky." Day 6. Mannequin Pinhead remains. I remind students that their chapter exams in 3 days. That's on Halloween. They complain. Day 7. Pinhead still said to my desk in the same position, "Students are forgetting about him." Day 8. Pinhead is old hat now. "Seriously, teacher, the joke is getting old." Day 9. Thursday, students begin a big and fake unit exam. Their heads are buried in concentration. I'm standing at the front of class. Pinhead is at the back, sitting at my desk. Without making a sound, Pinhead gets up and walks toward the students. He doesn't growl. He doesn't lunge. He just walks. Students panic. Desks are knocked over. They run, screaming out of the room, clear down the other end of the hallway. Teachers come pouring out of the classrooms. The principal and vice principal come running at full speed from the floor below. It is chaos. Absolute chaos. It's my favorite moment as a teacher. Story 6. Math teacher got mad after a kid made a smart aleck remark, asked him to drop his pants in front of the whole class to prove how big his balls were. He was fired. Never found out the size of that kid's balls. Story 7. Had a class of 6 3-testers. The retest results came back in early December and they had all passed, since I knew I wouldn't have them back in my class after Christmas break. I thought, screw it, and decided to culture them by showing Pulp Fiction over the course of 3 days if they promise not to say a word to the administration. The only part I skipped was the actual violation, in the assault scene. Got away with a clean. Story 8. I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but here it goes. Sometimes, after the droves of 14 and 15-year-olds shuffle back to their respective homes for the day, I take my shoes off and walk around the building in my socks. Story 9. Well, I harassed my entire class. We were discussing caption in regards to AI versus human intelligence, and I made the mistake of using a CAPTCHA with a D flash forward to the middle of class where I'm asking one of my students, "Jared, you've seen many Ds before, but never this D. How do you know it's a D? Does it have some kind of D-ness? What makes a D, etc." At this point, most of the class is laughing. Jared is very confused and I'm just hating myself. Lesson learned. Do not discuss the D or its D-ness with undergraduates. Story 10. My 7th grade English teacher, who was in her first year, never had control of her classroom. A couple of weeks before the end of the year, our class was arguing with her about something and she screamed, "Screw you all!" Never saw Mrs. Wallace again. Anyways, before we continue, thank you for watching our content, and if you enjoy our content and want to see more, click on that, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Thanks. Now, back to the video. Story 11. My science teacher freshman year had the best way to get students to not text in class. He gave us students a not-in-use phone before class and told him to pretend he was texting halfway through class. He proceeded to walk towards the students and request the phone from him. The student pretends to put up a fight, but eventually gives the teacher the phone. The class was on the 2nd story, was an outsides school. The teacher started to walk to the door and throw the phone off the 2nd story. The students, pretending, started to freak out, but all the other students' faces were all priceless. None of the students ever texted in class again. Story 12. Students were using perfume and water pistols. Teacher got sprayed. She injured the student with a pencil. Student got in trouble. Good times, 1960. Story 13. My father is a history teacher at a high school in the city. Once a particularly churlish student who sat in the front row as blandly and shamelessly on his phone in the middle of class. Naturally, my father tells him to hand over the phone. Surprisingly, the kid gave it up without a fight. However, the kid quickly pulls another phone out of his pocket. "I have 2 phones, the kid sneers. He points to the phone in his hand. "This one's for business." He points to the phone in my father's hand, and that one is for pleasure. "Well then," my father says, "that explains why this one is on vibrate." To this day, my dad is surprised that he didn't lose his job right then and there. Story 14. Teaching a science class about goats and sheep, to show the kids, middle schoolers and high schoolers, the animals up close. We plan on going to a livestock auction. I told them to not point or raise their hands because it was an actual auction and they might bid on the animal accidentally. For the respect of the community and business, they shouldn't do anything that looked like they were bidding. Then the question came, what if we bid? Who would have to pay for it? What if I raise my hand to ask you a question? What if I think the animal is cute and bid on it? One kid wouldn't let it go, so I said jokingly, "If you bid on any of the animals, I'll put you up for auction." He was the only African American kid in the class. Didn't get fired. Felt awful. Story 15. Everyone had suspicions that this one teacher was gay. During one class, he was opening files from his laptop and they were being projected onto the overhead. Accidentally opened a folder of naked photos of himself and another man. The entire class of grade 10 saw. Safe to say, all suspicions were confirmed. Story 16. Had a substitute teacher and wrote his name, Mr. Hall. You know how it sounds like on the whiteboard. He opened with, "Yes, gentlemen, I know what you're thinking. And you're correct, I'm whore. My mother was a whore, my father was a whore, and even my sister." Talk about engaging the class from the get-go. Story 17. I used to sub at a couple of high schools if I had some downtime when the kids were taking tests and grab the roster and start looking up the kids' Twitters. It always amazed me how stupid kids are with social media. Pictures of them doing illegal substances, drinking, talking smack about teachers, gossiping about other students, finding the "I hate this jerk" or "we have the hot sub" tweets were always the highlight of my day. Story 18. Not a teacher, but in training. I was in placement within a primary school, and a little kid pooped himself. I felt really bad for him and went to get a teacher without others finding out, but this kid started screaming that someone had pooped under his desk and then realized he had scooped it out and threw it under his desk and squashed it into a shoe for authenticity. Anyway, I then had to escort a whole class out of a classroom and tell the real story to a teacher, which suspended the child for 2 days. Story 19. Okay, I'm not proud of this, but here we go. It was my first year teaching high school English to a bunch of thugs. I was only a few years older than some of them. Near the end of the class, 2 guys are arguing loudly and I tell them to knock it off. They asked me to settle their argument for them. This one kid, let's call him Greg, says, "Mr. Canoehead, if some guy puts a gun to your head and tells you to give him a blowjob, you'd have to do it, right?" "Greg," I say, "that's not a conversation to have during class. The whole class is listening intently now." "Well," says Greg, "if someone put a gun to my head and told me to give him a blowjob, I do it." "Well, Greg," I said, "I'll remember that the next time I have a gun." The class erupts in laughter. Somehow, I don't get fired. Story 20. I'm very scared of wasps. My students knew this. A wasp flew in my classroom. I left the classroom and shut the door behind me, put my foot down so they can open it, and told them they weren't allowed out till they killed the wasp. They killed the wasp and later realized how I shouldn't trap 25 students in a room with a wasp. SRO saw me and just laughed. I never got in trouble. Story 21. That I've ever done. Nothing to nest dabbers. But there have been too many cringeworthy moments to recall. Totally got busted staring down a student's t-shirt one time. There was no way to explain that I wasn't serving. I was returning papers and my mind had gone blank as to her name. I was looking at the paper on her desk that had her name, which she shifted right under her boob. Just as I was looking at it, I was really trying to get a good look, craning my neck and everything. Didn't even try to explain. Girl was very cute, and there was no way she was going to believe me. Plus, I didn't want to admit that I couldn't remember her name. Story 22. There was this juggalo in my freshman math class that was a real jerk to everyone. The teacher was the football coach. The juggalo kid was saying some real nasty stuff to this sweet, quiet girl, and we all told him to stop, but he didn't. The coach got up and told him that he better knock it off or there were going to be problems. The juggalo kid stood up in a seat and yelled, "What the hell are you going to do, old man?" Coach went over, grabbed him by the front of his shirt and lifted him up and put his back against the wall. I don't know what he said exactly, but when he put the kid down, the kid said he was going to get the coach fired. I still remember the coach slowly turning around and saying, "I have taught here for over 30 years. I have led the school to many victories. They love me. You are little jerks, who has no respect for anybody and will never amount to anything." Who do you think will they believe? This happened years ago, so it's a little hazy. But that's basically how it went. He was also the teacher who fought to advance my really good stoner friend to the next math level. My friend would only show up about half the time and never turn in homework. But the coach told the administrators that my friend wasn't dumb, just not challenged. It would be a waste of their time to hold him back, to take a course he already mastered. They gave my friend the final, and he passed with a high B. I wish more teachers would like this. Story 23. Not a teacher, but this happened to my teachers. There were 2 teachers who were married and were working at the same school. They also had rooms next to each other, with a small storage room between them. In there they had a whole kitchen, shelves with glassware, a TV, and most importantly, a couch. And every so often they would meet there and have quarters during lunch. The school found out, and they were both forced to quit. They moved to a different town and got new jobs at different schools. Story 24. I'm not sure how I didn't get fired. I'm a music teacher and in the middle of rehearsal. A male student is acting up. I stopped the rehearsal and addressed his conduct, and he said, "At least I can get a date Friday night," and stupid first-year teacher me responded immediately, "Your right hand doesn't count." I have no clue how I did not get fired. That kid says I'm one of his favorite teachers, though. Story 25. Not a teacher, but when I was a high school senior, I had a homeroom teacher in her early 20s. She was also an NFL cheerleader, very hot. She showed me how she could fit her fist in her mouth. When she was done, she looked at me and said, "You probably shouldn't have done that." I agreed, but said, "Thank you." Story 26. Not a teacher, but this happened when I was in high school, about 35 years ago. My English teacher was the hot teacher in the school. One day she's sitting at a desk and I had a question to ask. Raised my hand, went to her desk, and from where she was sitting and I was standing in the dress she was wearing, could see a good deal down her top. I said, "Wow, look at all those freckles," and went on to my question without missing a beat. Fast forward to the end of the school year, as we are taking our final exams and she walks over to my desk, slowly leans over so I could get a good look and whisper, "I have not worn this dress since you commented on all my freckles, Pass. Now it's your turn to blush." She smiles and walks away. Story 27. Now my story about my father's. A former policeman was required to be a teaching assistant at a local juvenile delinquency school for a semester for a SJ degree. In reality, he was there to keep the students from beating up the teacher. These kids were all awful, rude, generally terrible kids. One day, one of the usual suspects was acting up, harassing the girls in the class and making a ruckus. My father, then 18, told the kid, a 19-year-old sophomore, to settle down and stop harassing the girls. Tired of this guy's crap, my father sent him into the hall. He refused to leave, so my dad had to physically restrain and drag him out of the classroom. And they got out there. My dad told the kid to go to the principal's office. The kid just smirked and got face-to-face with my dad. At this point, my dad just lost it and punched the guy right in the face as hard as he could. Guy never acted up again. Sometimes, you've just got to punch a kid. Story 28. One time I was teaching some high school marine science students about different taxonomic branches of critters that live in the sea. I had a PowerPoint with lots of pretty photos of animals, many of them weird ones. The principal walked in the room to observe for a few minutes while he talked about crustaceans, and then she left. So I clicked back to a photo of a barnacle and said, "See that appendage? That's 3 times the length of the rest of the barnacle. That's its penis." Story 29. Only slightly not safe for class. I'm not a teacher, but once back when I was a student at university, sometimes we had long classes, and after every hour we would have a 5-minute break to stretch your legs quickly or go for a wee. Our professor was milked up with a wireless microphone because it was one of those huge uni classrooms, around 80 students. When our professor, she was a MILF, mid-30s, went out for a toilet break, almost all the students stayed inside to catch up on writing down notes. All of a sudden, there was a loud farting noise through the classroom speakers, followed by pinging noise and happy humming and singing. Everyone burst out into laughter. She realized she left her mic on when she came back. That last hour of class must have been awkward for her. Poor woman. Story 30. Usually it's pretty harmless stuff, cussing or not intervening before a fight is about to start, but every once in a while I'll zone out and end up staring at a student for an uncomfortable amount of time, like 2 or 3 seconds longer than what would be considered normal. I'm sure it happens to everyone, but I hate zoning out around kids because it can make them feel unsafe. Most of the time I end up looking at some inanimate object, but sometimes they creep people out with a wide-eyed gaze. Either way, it's creepy and I hate it on the few occasions it happens during the year, NSFW, because I feel bad afterwards for making someone feel creeped out. Story 31. As a student, I must have been 15. We were in English class. I studied in France in this fancy language lab. Each student has a cubicle with a computer, headphones, and microphone, and must repeat or talk to the computer. Anyway, me being half English, these classes were a joke for me, and also for a friend who was also English. Also to be noted, the teacher can listen and talk to an individual student or override and speak to everyone. So a student gets to the word erection, as in the erection of a building. You can see where this is going. This particular student was struggling with it, and therefore the teacher started speaking to him. They then proceeded to repeat each one in turns the word erection over a dozen times, with even more enthusiasm and throw thrust every time. My mate and I were pissing ourselves laughing with every other student, having no idea why I nearly died that day. Story 32. Grade 10. Japanese class. One kid wouldn't stop talking. The teacher, who was actually Japanese and the nicest lady ever, said if he didn't stop trying to get the class attention, she'd make him striptease for the class. He did it. Another teacher walked in the middle of it, took one look at the kid, and turned right around. As far as I know, no one got punished. Story 33. 4th grade. We were talking about the White House. Teacher remembers a website that gives a tour of the White House. She has a screen on the projector. She can't remember the name of the website and blurt out probably whitehouse.com. And she asks if I'm sure, because sometimes the internet isn't what you expect. Class agrees. Whitehouse.com was at that time a porn site. The whole 4th grade class saw porn.